Hey there, come a little closer to the fire with me. Just close enough to feel that quiet warmth on your hands, and not so close that the candle smoke stings your eyes. I want to start with something small and almost ordinary, because the most unsettling truths usually hide inside ordinary things. Look at your hand for a moment. Really look. The soft folds at your knuckles. The tiny lines that cross and recross like old paths on a map. The color of it, whatever your shade happens to be, is not just a color. It is a message, written in pigment, carried across thousands and thousands of winters and summers. And here is the darker truth I promised you tonight. If you have very light skin, the kind people casually call white, you are wearing one of the newest disguises the human body ever invented. Newer than farming in many places. Newer than most of the world's first cities. New enough that, in deep time, it has barely had time to cool. We are going to move slowly through a long corridor of years. And along the way, you will notice a few strange details that never quite sit still in the mind. A single vitamin that the sun can steal from blood. A different vitamin that the sun must give, or bones soften in silence. A handful of tiny genetic typos that spread like whispers through families until whole continents look changed. And always, in the background, the same hush, the same deep, patient pressure of evolution, doing its work while people simply try to live. If you enjoy stories like this, soft history you can fall asleep to, please tap like and subscribe. And if you feel like it, leave a comment telling me where you're listening from tonight and what time it is for you. I love imagining all of us scattered across the map, different rooms, different skies, breathing to the same slow story. Now, let your shoulders drop. Let your jaw unclench. If your tongue is pressed to the roof of your mouth, let it rest. Take one gentle breath in through your nose and let it out as if you're fogging a cold window. Good. Again, slower. The room can dim. The world outside can keep turning without you. For a while, you can simply listen. I always think a fireplace is the right place for a story about light. Fire is ancient, older than our names for it. It makes its own small sun, right here in the dark. And the skin on your hands, the skin you're looking at, learned to bargain with light long before any of us had language for skin or sun or ancestor. Before anyone was pale, before anyone was anything in particular, humans were dark. Every one of them. That is not poetry. That is the quiet agreement of genetics, archaeology, and the stubborn fact that our species began under an intense equatorial sky. Picture Africa, not as a postcard, not as a single place, but as a vast breathing continent. Imagine open savannas where grass ripples like water. Acacia trees scattered like small umbrellas that do almost nothing at noon. Rock outcrops, warm to the touch, then scorching, then cooling again when the sun falls away. In that world, early modern humans walked and ran and sweated. They left the trees, stood upright, and stepped out into a brightness that could be merciless. I've always found it strange how the sun can feel gentle in a photograph, yet be so sharp in real life. If you were standing there with me, the heat would press against the top of your head like a hand. The air would shimmer. Dust would cling to your ankles. And the light would not just be light. It would be ultraviolet radiation, a kind of invisible fire that can slip into skin and do damage where you cannot see it. This is where the first bargain begins. In that equatorial brightness, the human body needed protection. Not protection from discomfort, but protection from something deeper and colder, the breaking of chemical bonds, the harming of DNA, the draining away of nutrients that make life possible. There is a vitamin called folate, a simple word for a complicated role. Folate is essential for building new cells, and especially for building new human beings. When an embryo is forming, when a spine is closing, when a brain is knitting itself together out of delicate instructions, folate is part of the quiet machinery that keeps the pattern from unraveling. And here is the unsettling detail: strong sunlight can degrade folate in the bloodstream. It does not do it with drama. It does not announce itself. It simply happens, the way water slowly erases footprints at the edge of a river. In a world where your ancestors spent day after day outside, hunting, gathering, traveling between water sources, living under a sky that offered little shade, folate depletion could mean fewer successful pregnancies. It could mean babies who never had a chance to breathe. It could mean weakness, slow healing, and a body that cannot quite hold together. Natural selection is not cruel in the way a person is cruel. It is colder than that. It does not hate you. It simply keeps what works. So the body answered with pigment. Melanin is the name we give to that answer. Imagine it like billions of tiny dark umbrellas inside the skin, absorbing the sharpest parts of sunlight before it can reach the deeper places where blood moves and cells divide. The more melanin, the more shielding. The deeper the brown, the more the body can stand in the open and keep its internal chemistry from being stripped away by light. For hundreds of thousands of years, this was the human default. Dark skin was not a trait that needed explaining. It was simply what humans looked like. The way a candle flame is simply what it is. If you could walk into a camp from 200,000 years ago, you would not find a spectrum of skin tones. You would find variations in height and scars and expressions, but not the modern palette we are used to. In the beginning, the palette was mostly one deep, protective range. And there was a second part of the bargain, quieter, but just as important. Because the sun that can steal folate can also give vitamin D. Vitamin D is often called a vitamin, but it behaves like a hormone, a signal that helps the body manage calcium, build bones, steady the immune system, keep muscles working. The body can make it when ultraviolet B light touches skin. In equatorial Africa, this was easy. The sun was generous with UVB. Even heavily pigmented skin could still make enough vitamin D because the light was so strong it could push through the melanin's filters. So in Africa, dark skin was the Goldilocks solution. Enough shielding to protect folate and DNA. Enough permeability to let in what was needed for vitamin D. Balanced. Stable. Quietly perfect for that place. Your earliest ancestors did not know any of this. Of course. They did not have microscopes or blood tests. They did not name vitamins. They simply lived. They carried water in their minds, remembered the smell of rain on clay, listened for distant birds as signs of predators, watched the horizon for storms. And their bodies, without their permission, kept adjusting to the rules of sunlight. Then, much later, something changed. Not the sun, the people. Around 60,000 years ago, small groups of humans began to leave Africa. Not everyone, not an entire continent marching at once, just small bands, maybe a few hundred at first, and moving along coasts and river corridors, following food, following curiosity, following pressure from droughts and crowded territories. We cannot be sure of every motive. Some scholars argue climate pulses opened green corridors through places that are deserts today. Others point to simple human restlessness, the feeling that there might be something over the next ridge. You know that feeling when you stand at the edge of a room you've always lived in and suddenly notice a door you never opened. It might have been like that, but stretched over generations. A few more steps north. A camp that becomes seasonal, then permanent. A shoreline followed because the sea always offers something if you learn how to listen to it. These people carried with them the African bargain, sealed into their skin. Dark, melanin-rich pigment. A shield built for fierce light. And that shield was about to enter a world where light behaves differently. As they moved into the Arabian Peninsula, into the Middle East, into the long spread of Eurasia, the sun began to change its angle. The sky clouded more often. Winters lengthened. The days grew shorter. The light thinned. The warmth of noon became less certain. In some places, the sun felt like a rumor, a pale coin low on the horizon. At first, the change would have been subtle. A cold morning, a week of cloud, a season where the body felt tired in a way no one could name. But the deeper the migration went, the more that ancient African shield began to complicate the second half of the bargain. Dark skin blocks UV. That is what it is designed to do. In the north, UV is not an enemy anymore. It is scarce food, and scarcity has its own quiet terror. Tonight, as the fire crackles and settles, I want you to hold that thought gently. No panic, just the slow understanding that the very thing that kept your ancestors alive under one sky could become a weight under another. A perfect adaptation can become a problem when the world changes around it. We are going to follow those footsteps into dimmer lands, where bones begin to soften, where mothers begin to fear childbirth for reasons no one can explain, where the body starts searching for a new bargain with light. And in the distance, like a candle flame seen through a long museum corridor, you can almost sense it already. Tiny changes in DNA, single letters shifting, accidents that will become salvation. Just listen to the soft breath of the room. The fire is steady. The story is steady. And we are only beginning to step out of Africa, one slow footfall at a time. If you listen closely, you can hear how slow those first journeys must have been. Not a straight line on a modern map, but a gentle drift, like sediment settling at the bottom of water. One family moving because the rains failed. another because game grew scarce. Footsteps pressing into dust, then into damp sand along a shore, then into mud near a river mouth. I like to imagine one evening on that coastal route, the sea on one side, dark as ink, breathing in and out. A small fire on the other side, sheltered behind stone, someone mending a hide, fingers numb in the night breeze. Salt in the air, smoke in the hair. A child half asleep, listening to the waves like a lullaby that never ends. Other groups moved inland, following river valleys like quiet veins through a landscape that could otherwise feel empty. Rivers are more than water. They are roads. They are memory. You can picture it, can't you? The way a river sounds before you see it. The dampness in the air. The green smell rising from reeds. The soft clay underfoot that holds every footprint. Through all of this, skin stayed dark. It had to. These migrants were still the children of African sunlight, carrying that shield into new places. And for a while, in many regions, it worked well enough. The body could still make vitamin D. The bargain still held. But the farther north some groups went, the more the arithmetic changed. Daylight became a thinner coin. Winter grew longer. Cloud cover became a habit. And the body, without words, began to count. Shrinking numbers. A quiet pressure. Not a curse spoken aloud, but a pressure written in physics. So keep your breathing slow as we approach that darker edge of the story. In part 2, we will step into the northern problem in full. The vitamin D crisis, the softening of bone, the silent danger for women in labor, and the first tiny genetic changes that begin to open the skin like a curtain, letting more scarce light in. For now, stay here with the fire. Let the waves fade. Let the river hush settle. Somewhere far away, under a low winter sun, a child will be born a little lighter than the rest. And no one will know what it means yet. Honestly, when I imagine that first northern twilight, I imagine how the light must have felt on their skin. Not hot, not harsh, just thin, like a veil. A kind of light you could almost miss if you were busy lifting stone, tying cord, listening for hoofbeats. It would have touched their faces and hands and then slipped away early, leaving the long hours of darkness to settle like dust. Somewhere along the route, they would have met strangers. Not myths, not monsters, just other humans with different faces, different tools, different ways of holding silence. We can't be sure how those meetings went. Trade, caution, conflict, curiosity. Probably all of it at different times. What matters is that the world was not empty, and the human story was already branching, then braiding back together again. And all the while, the same simple needs kept returning. Water, food, warmth, the safety of sleeping close enough to the fire that you could hear it breathing, far enough that sparks would not land in hair. The comfort of familiar footsteps in the night. The relief of morning when a thin sun finally returned. That is how deep time feels when you stand at its edge. Not like a calendar, like a slow river, carrying everything forward. The fire has settled into a deeper glow now, the kind that turns everything copper and soft. If you were here with me, I'd hand you a cup of something warm, and you'd feel the heat travel slowly through your palms, into your wrists, into the places where the day has been holding tension. And then we would do what humans have always done when the night grows wide. We would follow the problem wherever it leads. So let's step north. Imagine the sky lower, as if it has weight. Imagine a sun that rises reluctantly, slides along the horizon, and disappears early, leaving behind a long bruise of twilight. Imagine winters that last, not like a bad mood, but like a whole season of dimness that presses into bone and thought. Your ancestors walked into places like that with dark skin. Beautiful, melanin-rich skin. Skin that had kept folate safe under Africa's fierce noon. Skin that had once been the difference between thriving and vanishing. Here, that same protection began to block something precious. Vitamin D. I know. It sounds like a modern word, like something printed on a bottle in a pharmacy aisle. But the need is ancient. Vitamin D is the body's quiet permission slip for calcium to enter the blood and become bone. Without it, bones do not harden properly. They stay softer than they should. In children, that softness can become rickets, a condition where legs bow, ribs form bumps, spines curve in ways that make ordinary movement feel like work. In adults, the same deficiency can hollow bones from the inside, making them ache, making fractures more likely, even without obvious injury. And then there is the part people rarely say out loud, even now. Childbirth. A pelvis that grows under chronic vitamin D deficiency can be shaped differently, not by a dramatic twist, but by small angles and narrowness, the quiet geometry of bone formed without enough minerals. In a modern hospital, that might mean an intervention, a surgery, a chance. In deep prehistory, it often meant the mother could not deliver safely. It meant loss, whispered around a fire, then buried under soil that freezes in winter. It meant fewer women surviving to raise children. It meant fewer children, too. That is how selection becomes sharp, not because anyone chooses it, but because life quietly counts who remains. If you've ever stood in a museum and seen a skeleton behind glass, you know the feeling I mean? The hush, the distance, the dust on the display case, and yet the strange intimacy of realizing that this was someone, a person who laughed, who worked, who feared storms. In some ancient northern skeletons, scientists see signs that look like vitamin D deficiency. The bowed long bones, the softened mineral patterns. The story is not always clear, and it is debated how widespread it was in every region. But the pressure was real enough that the human body began searching for a new bargain. And here is the strange rule of evolution. It cannot decide to change. It can only wait for accidents. Deep in the process of copying DNA, now and then, a single letter shifts. A tiny typo. Most typos do nothing. Some are harmful. A few, in the right place at the right time, become a doorway. In northern latitudes, where UVB is scarce, A doorway that lets in a little more light can feel like salvation. There are genes that influence how much melanin your skin produces. You don't need to memorize their names, but it helps to know this skin color is not one switch. It is more like a set of dimmers scattered across the genome. Turn one down slightly, and you get a subtle change. Turn several down, and the body looks transformed. One well-studied change in Europeans involves a gene called SLC24A5. A single letter change there can reduce melanin production noticeably, not turning someone into the palest modern complexion overnight, but making them lighter than their neighbors. Another change, often discussed alongside it, involves SLC45A2, and there are others, too, including regions that influence eye and hair pigmentation. What matters for the story is how these changes behave when the environment is harsh. Picture a small band living under gray skies. Food is hard won. Winter is long. Children are fragile. Now imagine one child is born a little lighter. Not white as we imagine it today, just lighter. Their skin lets in a little more UVB when summer finally arrives. Their body makes a little more vitamin D. Their bones mineralize a little better. If that child survives and has children, those children might carry the same small advantage. It is almost unfair how small advantages can become enormous over time. Because, over generations, a little better can become the only ones left. This is natural selection at its most quiet and relentless. No speeches, no banners, just differential survival. A pressure that doesn't shout, but never stops. And it happened more quickly than most people expect. I've always found it eerie, honestly, how fast the human surface can change when the pressure is strong. Pale skin, in evolutionary terms, is young. In many regions, it seems to have become common only within the last 10, 000 to 20, 000 years. Sometimes even more recently, depending on the population and the gene. That is newer than agriculture in some places, newer than pottery in others, a recent adjustment layered on top of a very old body. There is physical evidence that can feel almost dreamlike. Ancient DNA from some early Europeans suggests combinations that surprise modern eyes, like dark skin with light eyes. It reminds us that the neat boxes we carry in our minds are not the way evolution works. Traits can travel separately. The dimmer for eye pigment can shift earlier or later than the dimmer for skin. The body is a mosaic, not a uniform paint job. And here comes another twist, gentle and strange. This did not happen once. Different human populations lightened in different ways, in different places, at different times. Europeans and East Asians, for example, often share the outcome of lighter skin at certain latitudes, but many of the specific genetic changes are not the same. This is what biologists call convergent evolution, separate groups facing similar problems, finding similar solutions through different routes. It's like two people in different rooms learning to soothe themselves in different ways. One hums. One breathes slowly. Both arrive at calm. In some places, the story has an extra layer. Diet. There are populations living at very high latitudes who did not evolve extremely pale skin. And one reason often discussed is that traditional diets rich in vitamin D reduce the selection pressure. Marine mammals, fatty fish, liver, foods that carry vitamin D through darkness. If your food gives you what the sun cannot, your skin does not have to change as drastically. Biology and culture, hand in hand, bargaining with the same problem. Then, just as many groups were finding their balance, humans changed the rules again. Farming arrived around 10,000 years ago in several regions. People began to settle, plant, harvest. Agriculture made food more predictable in some ways, and it allowed populations to grow. But it also narrowed diets. Hunter-gatherers often ate a wide range of foods, including fish and wild game that could provide vitamin D. Early farmers leaned heavily on grains and plants that contain almost none of it. When farming spread into northern Europe and other low UV regions, the vitamin D crisis could sharpen again. Less sun, less dietary vitamin D, and now the pressure for lighter skin could become even more intense. You can picture it softly. A village. Smoke curling from low roofs. Grain stored in clay-lined pits. Footsteps on packed earth. And somewhere in that village, a child with a slightly lighter complexion grows stronger through winter, while another child struggles with softer bone. No one says vitamin D. No one says gene. They just notice who thrives. Over generations, those small differences become a tide. If you step back far enough, the pattern across the planet begins to look like a gradient, like watercolor bleeding outward from the equator. Darker where UV is intense, lighter where UV is scarce. Not perfectly, because history is messy, because people move, because diets matter, because chance matters. But the general shape holds, a soft map drawn by sunlight. And now, we reach the modern strangeness. The world you live in is not the world that shaped your skin. Airplanes, ships, roads, jobs, love, war, curiosity. All of it has moved people faster than evolution can keep up. Light-skinned bodies now live under fierce tropical suns. Dark-skinned bodies now live under long northern winters. The ancient bargain is scrambled, so we invent new bargains. Sunscreen, hats, long sleeves, shade, vitamin D supplements, fortified foods. We hack the old biology with modern tools, the way you might add a blanket in a cold room instead of evolving thicker fur. There's something quietly comforting in that. We are not trapped by our past solutions. We can learn. We can adapt with culture, not just genes. And that brings us to the deepest, simplest truth beneath all of this. Skin color is a surface strategy, a small set of genetic adjustments, a negotiation with UV light and 2 vitamins, folate and vitamin D. That's it. It is not a measure of worth. It is not a separate kind of human. Underneath the pigment, the shared story is overwhelming. If you feel yourself drifting now, that's perfect. You don't need to hold the gene names or the dates. You can let them fall like dust settling on a museum floor. What matters is the feeling of deep time, the way the body quietly changes when survival demands it, and the way every shade of human skin is an answer to the same question. How can a person live here, under this sky, with this light? In the next part, we can linger even longer on the detective work. Ancient genomes, surprising combinations, and the gentle reminder that the differences we see are small compared to what we share. For now, stay with the fire. Listen to the soft crackle. Imagine a far northern shoreline where a thin sun touches a pale forearm for the first time in months. And the body, grateful without knowing why, begins to make what it needs. Let me slow down inside one moment, because this is where the history feels darkest, even when we keep the language gentle. A winter camp, not a grand thing, just shelter. Maybe a cave mouth, or a wall of hides stretched between poles, stitched with sinew, creaking when the wind leans on it. Outside, the world is pale, snow that squeaks underfoot, a river locked under ice, still breathing beneath it, a low sound you feel more than hear. Inside, the air smells of smoke and damp wool and the faint metallic scent of stone. A child sits close to the fire, knees drawn up, hands held out, palms open like small bowls. The child's legs are not straight. They curve, subtly at first, then more. The child tires quickly. The ribs show odd bumps beneath the skin when someone washes them with cold water and a scrap of cloth. No one knows why. They only know it is happening. Then the child grows, if the child is lucky. And years later, if the child becomes a young woman, her body carries that old softness into the shape of her pelvis. When labor comes, the danger is not dramatic, not a monster at the door. It is a quiet, mechanical problem. The body tries. Hours pass. The fire burns low. The room fills with whispered prayers, with the soft scrape of feet on packed earth, with hands damp from water and fear. In a world without surgery, this kind of trouble can end in silence. That is what I mean when I say selection becomes sharp. The North did not just make people cold. It asked their bodies to rewrite themselves, or pay. And the rewriting did happen. In many places, in many ways, through many little letter changes, each one a tiny adjustment. Over time, they layered. A few dimmers in the genome, turned down a little, then a little more. So let that be the last warm thought you carry towards sleep. Every shade is a local answer, and the deep story underneath is shared. One species, one long walk, one slow bargain with light. And if you ever feel a flicker of unease about the way bodies change, try to let it soften into awe instead. Evolution is not a judge. It is a slow hand adjusting a lantern wick. A little more flame here, a little less there, never perfect, always negotiating. Even now, your own skin is negotiating. It remembers old suns. It reacts to new ones. It carries melanin like a quiet archive, and it responds to light in ways your ancestors would recognize, even if they could not explain them. A faint warmth on the cheek, a chill in the shadow, the gentle urge to seek shade or to seek sun, depending on what your body needs. So keep listening, keep resting. The bargain continues. Just a little more light, and the story continues. If you were standing here with me, you would hear the room before you hear my words. The fire has a slow pulse, and the candles make a tiny hiss. So let's move forward. Or maybe backward. We're going to slip into a place that feels like night even in the middle of the day. A museum. I know that sounds modern, but the feeling is ancient. The hush, the cool air, footsteps softened by wood. Imagine walking down a long corridor with glass cases on either side. Inside, to bone, tools, fragments of clay and ochre, tiny beads that once warmed against someone's skin, a jawbone with teeth worn flat from chewing tough foods and grit, a skull that once held a living mind, a mind that worried about winter and watched the sky like a clock. In the museum hush, you can feel deep time as something physical, like dust settling on your shoulders. And you can also feel the strange intimacy of this truth. We can read skin color in bones now, not by looking at them, not by guessing, but by pulling tiny threads of ancient DNA from them and comparing those threads to the ones we carry today. Honestly, when I first learned that, it unsettled me. The body is a record. So, in this museum corridor, let's lean over the detective work. For a long time, people told a simple story. Humans moved north. The sun got weaker. Skin got lighter. But evolution, as you've probably guessed, is not a neat storyteller. It is a collector of accidents. In the oldest genomes we can recover from ancient Europe, the early hunter-gatherers who lived there after modern humans arrived, we often find something that surprises modern imagination. They did not necessarily look like a postcard of modern Northern Europe. Many of them carried the genetic signatures for darker skin than the average European today. Some ancient individuals seem to have had dark skin and light eyes, a combination that makes our modern categories wobble. It's debated exactly how common each combination was in each region and time period, and the science keeps refining itself as new genomes are recovered. But the broad shape is clear for a long stretch of time. Europe was not uniformly pale. I want you to picture one of those hunter-gatherers not as a statistic, but as a person, a man, in what is now the western edge of Europe, near a coastline where the sea smells sharp and cold. His camp is set back from the water behind dunes. The wind moves sand like flour. He walks barefoot over damp clay near a river mouth, where the water is fresh enough to drink if you choose the right place. His hands are strong. His skin is darker than you might expect if you've grown up with modern images of ancient Europeans. His eyes, though, might be light, scattering the pale daylight in a way that makes them look blue or gray, like the winter sky. He does not know what his eyes mean. He only knows what they can see, and he knows hunger and salt and the low sun that never climbs as high as it does in Africa. Now, somewhere else in Europe, later, there are farmers. Their world smells different. Less sea, more grain dust. The air in their storage huts is warm and dry. Their hands smell like soil. Their bread is heavy, Their porridge is plain. Between those two worlds, hunter and farmer, something accelerates. Because remember the old bargain. In low UV environments, the body needs help making vitamin D. If a diet includes enough vitamin D, the pressure on skin to lighten is softer. If the diet loses it, the pressure sharpens. So we can think of skin color not only as a response to sky, but also as a response to what sits on your tongue. You know that feeling when you eat the same meal too many days in a row, and your body begins to crave something you can't name. Imagine that craving as an invisible deficiency, one that turns into softened bone in children and danger in childbirth. This is where the science becomes both simple and eerie. A few genetic dimmers matter a lot. One of the most famous dimmers in many European populations is a change in a gene called SLC24A5. It is not a new organ, not a new limb. It is a single-letter difference in a long code, and yet it can reduce melanin production enough to matter. Another often discussed change involves SLC45A2 together. Variations like these can make skin significantly lighter. And what's strange is how quickly these changes can spread when survival depends on them. Imagine a village at a northern latitude where winter comes early. The sun is weak. Children grow slowly. Some families lose infants. Some mothers do not survive childbirth. It is not always dramatic. It is sometimes just the way a body fails quietly. Then, in one family, the children have stronger legs. The daughters grow into women whose pelvises form a little more normally. Their babies survive in higher numbers. That family grows. Shrinking numbers for one line. Expanding numbers for another. That is the heartbeat of selection. No one in that village chooses pale skin because it is beautiful. At least, not at first. The first choice is simply survival. The preference comes later, if it comes at all. The pressure is not aesthetic. It is arithmetic. And here comes the part that feels like a shadow moving across the floor of our museum. This lightning happened more than once. Europeans are not the only people who faced dim suns. East Asian populations moved into northern latitudes too. They faced similar vitamin D pressures. And in many regions, they also developed lighter skin. But the genetic route is often different. In many East Asian lineages, the specific European SLC24A5 change is far less common. Other gene variants, in different parts of the pigmentation system, played larger roles. There are regions affecting melanin production and distribution, and some mutations there became common because they solved the same problem. Convergent evolution. Different keys opening similar doors. I find that comforting in a way. It means pale skin is not a single identity. It is a repeated invention. A tool made more than once. If you were standing here with me, I'd point to the museum map and trace the routes with a finger. Out of Africa, along coasts, through river valleys, into Europe, into East Asia. Each route has its own weather, its own food, its own set of pressures. And in some places, the story refuses to follow the simple rule. Consider the far north again, places where the sun disappears for months. You might assume those would be the palest populations on Earth. Yet some traditional high-latitude groups maintained darker pigmentation than expected. One reason often discussed is diet. A life built on fish, marine mammals, fat-rich meats, and organs can supply vitamin D in a way grain cannot. If vitamin D arrives through food, the skin does not need to open as wide to the sky. The selection pressure for paler skin becomes gentler, even in darkness. Culture can soften biology's harshest demands. The most surprising ancient genomes remind us of that. A man living thousands of years ago might carry a mix of traits that modern categories would insist cannot coexist. Darker skin with blue eyes, intermediate skin with very dark hair, changes arriving at different speeds, because the dimmers are independent. They move through populations like separate threads, braiding and unbraiding. And this brings us to a quieter truth that rests beneath all the science. Skin color is controlled by a small number of genes compared to the whole genome. Not one, not two, but still only a thin slice. Out of about 20,000 genes, perhaps a few dozen have major influence on pigmentation. The exact number varies depending on how you count and what you include, and new research keeps refining it. But the point stays steady. The visible differences are built from a tiny fraction. A tiny fraction that humans have spent a great deal of history misunderstanding. But tonight, we are not here to argue. We are here to breathe and to watch the story unfold like candlelight on a wall. So, stay with me as we leave the museum corridor and step back outside into the ancient world again. We are standing at the edge of a northern settlement. The ground is hard. The air tastes like frost. A river nearby moves under ice, still alive, still breathing. The sun is low even at midday, a pale disk. Somewhere in this settlement, a baby is born a little lighter than the others. The family notices. They don't have a word for mutation. They might have a story, though a grandmother might say the child carries winter in their skin. A father might wonder if the child will be strong. The child grows. Let's linger on that copying error for a moment, because it is one of the strangest kinds of tragedy. Nothing crashes. No thunder. No announcement. Just a quiet change inside a cell. Picture a young woman in a northern band, long before farming, when people still follow herds and rivers. Her shelter is a cave mouth or a hide tent stitched with sinew. The air inside smells like smoke and damp fur. She wakes before dawn to the sound of water somewhere in the dark. Liquid water, precious, moving under a skin of ice. She steps out, and the cold presses into her nose, into her eyelashes. Her breath becomes a small cloud and then disappears. She wraps a cloak tighter, feeling the weight of it on her shoulders, and she turns her face toward the weak horizon where the sun will rise if the clouds allow it. Years pass like that. Short summers, long winters. Her skin, still rich with melanin, does what it was built to do. It blocks UV. It protects. It keeps folate safe. That protection is ancient, loyal, stubborn. But the sky here offers so little UV that the protection becomes a closed door. She doesn't know the word rickets. She only knows the ache in her hips when she walks, and the way some children are slow to stand, their legs curving under the weight of growing bodies. She notices that some women do not survive childbirth. Their names are spoken softly. Now imagine, in the same band, another child is born with that quiet typo in a pigment gene. A small shift, a little less melanin. In summer, the child's skin catches more UV. Their body makes a little more vitamin D. Their bones mineralize a little better. Their immune system is steadier when coughs sweep through the camp. They do not become instantly pale. It's not magic. It's a gradient, a dial turned slightly, but in a world of shrinking numbers, slightly is everything. That child grows into adulthood. They walk a little longer without pain. If they are a girl, her pelvis forms a little more generously. If she becomes pregnant, she has a slightly higher chance of surviving the birth. The baby has a slightly higher chance of living through the first winter. You can feel how small the advantage is, and how enormous it becomes when repeated across generations. And there's another strange twist. Sometimes, the traits hitchhike. A change that affects pigment in the skin sits near a change that affects pigment in the eyes. Or a change in a regulatory region alters the amount of pigment in the iris. And suddenly a person is born with eyes that scatter light, eyes that look like the sky rather than soil. The person doesn't choose that. The band doesn't understand it. They simply see it. In a small community where every face is familiar, rarity can become its own kind of power. Some scholars argue that once unusual eye colors appeared, social preference could have helped them spread, not because they help survival directly, but because humans are humans. And we notice what is different. We remember it. We sometimes desire it. So natural selection and human choice, both quiet, both relentless, can braid together. When I think about it, it feels like watching candlelight twist through smoke. No straight lines, just patterns forming, breaking, forming again. And while this is happening in Europe, somewhere in East Asia, other bands are moving through forests and river valleys, and the solution arrives through different genetic changes. The same problem, different answers. It looks similar to the eye, but under the microscope it is a separate story. And the dimmer, turned slightly down, moves forward into the next generation. In part 4, we'll watch how farming changes the body's relationship to vitamin D even more, how diets become narrower, how the pressure sharpens, and how, in a strangely fast rush of only a few thousand years, whole populations can transform. For now, let your mind rest on the image of that museum corridor. The hush, the dust, the glass. History is not only behind us, it is inside us. And as the fire continues to breathe in this room, our story continues to move, step by step, like soft footsteps down a long hallway, toward the next turning of the light. Come a little closer to the fire with me. Not physically, if you're already comfortable, just in your imagination, as if the warmth is something you can borrow through the air. We left our last scene in a northern settlement, where one small genetic dimmer could mean the difference between a line that fades and a line that continues. Now we're going to watch the world change again, and this time the change is not in the sky. It is in the bowl. Around 10,000 years ago, in a few places on the planet, humans begin doing something that feels calm and reasonable. They gather seeds. They press them into soil. They wait. If you've ever planted anything, even a single herb on a windowsill, you know the feeling. The patience. The way you check the surface of the dirt as if it might speak. The way the air smells after watering, dark and mineral, like clay waking up. Early farming was not a shiny triumph at first. It was work. It was sore backs. It was fingers cracked from cold water and rough stalks. It was the anxious quiet of watching the sky for rain. And it brought a strange kind of darkness into human life. A narrowing. Hunter-gatherer diets were often wide. Fish when the river offered it. Game when the herd came through. Berries and roots when the season turned. Liver, marrow, eggs, anything that could be found. Variety, like a forest full of paths. Farming, especially early grain farming, can become a single road. Wheat, barley, rice, millet, a food that fills the belly but does not always fill the hidden needs. And one of those hidden needs is vitamin D. In a low UV world, vitamin D is like a quiet lamp you carry inside your bones. Without it, calcium does not settle correctly. Bones soften. Legs bow. Pelvises can form in ways that make childbirth more dangerous. Immune systems can falter. The body becomes tired in a way that has no name. Now imagine an inland farming village in northern Europe. Let's stay in that farming village a little longer, because this is where the story stops being abstract and becomes something you can almost hear. It's early morning. The ground is stiff with frost. A thin skin of ice clings to puddles near the doorway. Inside the longhouse, someone stirs a pot with a wooden spoon. The porridge thickens slowly, and the smell is warm, but it is also plain, a smell that says, "This again." Smoke curls up and finds the cracks in the roof. It leaves a faint bitterness on the tongue. A child coughs in the corner, a small dry sound. Outside, a rooster does not exist yet in this part of the world, but there is still a bird call, distant, sharp, and lonely. The people here are not weak. They are not foolish. They are doing what humans always do. They are choosing steadiness over uncertainty, fields that stay put, grain that can be stored, a life that does not require chasing animals across a white horizon. But steadiness has its own price. In late winter, after months of low sun and narrow diet, a young girl stands up and her legs tremble. Her bones are a little softer than they should be. She is not the only one. You can see it in the way some children run with a slight sway, in the way knees angle, in the way ribs form small bumps along the chest wall. No one calls it a disease. They call it fate, or bad luck, or the cost of coal. And when this girl becomes a woman, when she labors to bring a child into the world, her body carries that history. The pelvis is not just a bone. It is a record of childhood sunlight, a record of the foods that did or did not appear on the tongue. Sometimes the birth is fine. Sometimes it is long. Sometimes the room fills with a terrible quiet, the kind of quiet that makes every candle seem too loud. The women who have been through it before do not speak much. They wipe sweat. They hold a hand. They listen to breathing the way you listen to the river in the dark, trying to know what it will do next. When births become safer for one family line, when their daughters survive more often, that line grows. It's not romantic. It's not heroic. It's simple persistence. That persistence, repeated over centuries, can change a whole population. And that is why the spread of lighter pigmentation in certain northern farming groups can be so fast in evolutionary terms. When a trait touches survival at the level of mothers and infants, selection becomes sharp, almost surgical. Now, breathe with that thought for a moment. It's heavy, but we can hold it softly, because the same story has its gentler mirror too. On the coast, not far from some of these early farms, a small band still follows the old way. They gather mussels. They dry fish on racks. Their hands smell of salt and oil. Their children chew on strips of smoked meat that carries nutrients like hidden fire. Their skin might remain darker than the inland farmers, even at the same latitude. Not because the sun is different, but because the food is. When you see that, you realize the body is not only shaped by light, it is shaped by choices, by roots, by what the river gives and what the field gives. And when humans move, when they trade, when they marry across bands, the stories mix like two streams meeting. Sometimes one stream is clearer. Sometimes one is darker. Together they become something new. The sea is far away. The fish are not daily. The diet becomes porridge and bread. A little milk if you have animals. A bit of meat when luck allows. But the old steady stream of vitamin D from fatty fish and wild organs is reduced. Outside, winter stretches long. The sun sits low. Clouds hang like wool. Even when the sun appears, it feels thin. And inside this village, you begin to see rickets more often. You begin to see children with softened bones. You begin to see mothers in labor, facing a body that was built under scarcity of light and scarcity of nutrient at the same time. This is where the selection pressure sharpens into something fierce. It is not simply, the sun is weak. It is, the sun is weak, and the food no longer carries the missing piece. So any genetic change that lets in more UV, even a little, becomes more powerful. You can almost hear the numbers shifting. A family with lighter skin has slightly healthier children, slightly stronger bones, slightly better odds. They have more surviving grandchildren. The village grows from their line. Meanwhile, families with heavier pigmentation, who might have been able to manage in the same latitude when they ate more fish, now struggle more often. Again, not drama, not villains, just math in the dark. When geneticists look back through ancient DNA, they see what you would expect from this kind of pressure. Certain pigmentation variants rise quickly. They sweep through populations in a way that suggests positive selection, faster than chance would do alone. The exact dates vary depending on the region and the data set, and there is always debate at the edges. But the overall pattern points to the same thing. The most familiar pale skin tones of modern Europeans are relatively recent, spreading widely after agriculture becomes common in northern latitudes. It's strange to hold that in your mind. Pale skin as an innovation, newer than many pottery traditions, newer than some farming itself. A local update to the human body. And not just in Europe. In East Asia, in northern latitudes, similar pressures exist. But again, the genetic root can differ. Different dimmers. Similar outcome. Convergent evolution humming quietly under different skies. Now let's pause, because there's an exception that feels like a soft lesson. Far in the north, in places where winter is almost a season of darkness, some traditional populations did not become as pale as the simple latitude rule would predict. One major reason discussed is diet. If your ancestors ate marine mammals, fish, and fat-rich animal foods that carried vitamin D like stored sunlight, the body had a different bargain. The skin did not need to open as wide. The pressure to lighten was gentler. So culture, once again, can redirect biology. I've always found that detail strangely comforting. It suggests that humans are not only shaped by the sky, we also shape ourselves by what we choose to eat, how we move, where we settle, what we trade, what we refuse. Now, let's widen the view to a map in your imagination. At the equator, where UV is strong year-round, dark skin remains the oldest human solution. A melanin shield that protects folate, protects DNA, lets a body live long enough to have children. As you move away from the equator, skin tones tend to lighten in a gradient, not a staircase. A slow fade, like dusk. And it's not perfect, because history is never perfect. Migration and mixing complicate everything. People move. People marry. People carry their old sunlight into new places. In the Americas, for example, populations arrive with ancestry linked to East Asia. Over time, as groups spread through different environments, they adapt in different directions. Some remain in higher latitudes with lighter tones. Others move into intense tropical UV and develop deeper pigmentation again, all within a relatively short evolutionary time. The world is full of these small adjustments, these local negotiations. But then, very recently, the negotiation is disrupted. Ships, empires, trains, planes. Within a few centuries, people move faster than evolution ever expected. A person whose skin was tuned for clouded northern light finds themselves under a fierce tropical sun. A person whose skin was tuned for equatorial intensity finds themselves living through long northern winters under gray skies, often indoors. The old bargain, skin matched to sky, becomes misaligned, and you can feel the consequences. In high UV places, pale skin faces higher risk from UV damage unless behavior changes. Shade, clothing, sunscreen, the modern tools. In low UV places, deeply pigmented skin can face vitamin D scarcity unless the diet and lifestyle compensate. Supplements, fortified foods, time outdoors when possible. This is not a moral story. It's a practical one. Our bodies still carry old instructions. But now, we can intervene. We can take vitamin D as a small daily ritual, like swallowing a piece of summer. We can put on sunscreen like a thin, invisible cloak. We can turn the harshness of the environment down with technology, with choices, with knowledge. And in the background, evolution continues, but it is no longer moving in simple lines. In cities where people from many ancestries live together, children are born with mixed UV histories in their genes. There is no single correct latitude for them. There is only life, complex and modern, and the body doing its best. Now, as the fire crackles, I want to guide your mind toward the deepest, simplest meaning of this story. Skin color, biologically, tells you one primary thing: how your ancestors negotiated ultraviolet light. That's it. Not intelligence, not worth, not kindness, not destiny, just UV. Melanin is a tool, a sunscreen and a shield. It preserves folate in intense sun. It reduces damage. It helps life continue under fierce skies. Less melanin is also a tool. It lets in more UV where UV is scarce. It helps the body make vitamin D in dim places. It helps bones form, helps births succeed, helps immune systems stand up. Two strategies, each brilliant in its own environment. And the differences between them, the visible ones people fixate on, sit on a tiny fraction of the genome compared to everything humans share. Underneath, we are overwhelmingly similar. One species, one long story, one deep river of ancestry that flows back to Africa. If you let that thought settle, it can feel like the museum hush again. The soft footsteps, the dust of deep time. Every shade of human skin is a page cover, not the book. So, as you lie there, you can look at your own hand in your imagination. Or perhaps you can actually look at it if you want, letting the screen dim, letting your eyes soften. That color is not a label. It is a memory of sunlight and food and survival. It is your ancestors standing under a particular sky, breathing in cold air or hot air, eating fish or grain, carrying babies through seasons that did not care about them, and continuing anyway. And somewhere in that long chain, a few small letters in DNA changed, quietly, like dust settling, like candle smoke drifting, like river breath under ice. In Part 5, we can drift even deeper into the idea of convergent evolution and the strange side paths, hair and eye color, body shapes, and the way the modern world scrambles the old map. But for now, let the story blur a little. Let it become background. The fire is steady. Your breathing can become steady, too. And the ancient bargain between skin and sun can rest. For a while, inside the soft darkness behind your eyes. The fire has shifted a little, and you can hear it. A tiny collapse of ember into ash, like a quiet reminder that even warmth is a kind of change. So let's continue, gently, into the next layer of the story. The layer where skin is not the only surface that remembers the sky. Because when humans stepped into dimmer worlds, the body began adjusting in several places at once, like a house being sealed against winter drafts. Someone presses moss into the gaps between stones. Someone hangs thicker hides over a doorway. The air inside grows warmer and also darker. That is what northern latitudes did to our species. They asked us to hold heat. They asked us to catch light. And while the skin was negotiating with ultraviolet radiation, other traits drifted, sometimes sticking, sometimes fading out again. Not because evolution decided to make a person look like any modern label. It does not think in labels. It responds to pressure, to survival, to the soft mathematics of who lives long enough to have children. So let's walk again through that museum corridor in your mind. The floor is cool under your feet. You can smell old paper and polished wood. The cases are lit from above, a thin light that makes bone gleam like dry clay. In one case, a skull. In another, a strand of hair preserved in ice. In another, a carved bead of amber that looks like it trapped sunset. And the plaques try to tell the story with dates and tidy names. But the objects say something simpler. Humans keep adapting. Eye color in parts of Europe is one of the most famous visible shifts besides skin. Blue eyes are not blue pigment, and I've always found that detail strangely calming, like realizing something you feared is only a shadow. Blue eyes happen when there is less brown pigment in the iris, and light scatters inside the eye the way it scatters in the sky. It is physics doing a quiet trick. Why did the mutation spread? That part is debated. Some scholars argue it could have been genetic hitchhiking, meaning it sat near other changes being selected for and rode along. Others suggest sexual selection, the simple human tendency to notice rarity in a small group, and sometimes to desire it. It could be both. It could be neither and still spread by chance in a small population that later grew. Evolution can be like that. A candle flame flickers. Sometimes it catches. Sometimes it doesn't. Hair color shows variation in some regions too. In many equatorial populations, hair remains very dark because pigment is abundant and protective. In some northern and western Eurasian groups, different pigment balances can appear, leading to brown, then blonde, then red. The survival advantage of those hair colors is not clear. Many researchers think social preference could have played a role because rare traits can stand out. Yet that is still uncertainty, and deep time asks us to be humble. Body shape shifts in quieter ways. You know that feeling when you step into cold air and instinctively pull your shoulders in, making yourself smaller. Whole populations, across generations, can lean toward shapes that hold warmth in cold environments. Stockier bodies with slightly shorter limbs can reduce surface area relative to volume, helping retain heat. In hotter climates, longer limbs and lean frames can help shed heat. Not a strict rule, not a single look, just tendencies shaped by wind and winter. Even faces show hints of climate. In dry, cold air, narrower nasal passages can help warm and humidify breath before it reaches delicate lungs. In warm, humid climates, wider noses can move more air quickly without needing to warm it so much. It is strange to realize that even a nose can be a kind of weather report. So when people speak of a northern package of traits, it can be a useful metaphor. But it can mislead if you imagine one neat parcel tied with string. It is a handful of traits, each with its own genetic story, sometimes traveling together, sometimes not. And this is where the story becomes even more intricate. East Asian populations also evolved lighter skin in many regions, but often through different genetic pathways than Europeans, and without the same degree of eye color variation. The outcomes overlap, but they are not identical. Different solutions, different side effects. Convergent evolution again, but with local flavor. Then come the cases that break the tidy rule entirely. High latitudes with darker pigmentation, sustained by diet. Coastal communities and Arctic peoples living on fish and marine mammals, carrying vitamin D in their food like a lantern, reducing the pressure for skin to lighten. In such places, snow and water can also reflect UV in sharp flashes, and darker pigmentation can still be protective. Sunlight matters, yes, but diet and culture can change the rules. And then there is the braiding. When modern humans moved into territories where Neanderthals lived, they did not simply wave and pass by. They competed. They shared landscapes. They sometimes fought. They sometimes traded. They sometimes made families together. The traces of that are in us. A quiet biological fact, the human story has always included mixing. Which brings us, inevitably, to the modern world. In the last few centuries, the map redraws itself at a pace deep time can barely track. People cross oceans. Cities become magnets. A family with ancestors from a high UV environment can live in a low UV environment within one generation. A family with ancestors from a low UV environment can live under intense UV. The old bargain between skin and sky becomes scrambled. If you were standing here with me, you would hear the modern version of the museum hush. A subway station late at night, a library, a hospital corridor, the soft hum of artificial light, footsteps, breath. Under that light, skin still behaves like it was built to behave. Light skin lets UV in easily. It makes vitamin D quickly, and it risks more UV damage in high UV environments. Dark skin blocks UV strongly. It protects folate and DNA in intense sun, and it risks vitamin D deficiency in low UV environments. So the modern world asks us to do what evolution never planned for: manage the mismatch consciously. And we do. We make sunscreen, a modern melanin in a bottle. We make vitamin D tablets, little pieces of stored sunlight. We fortify foods. We cover skin. We seek shade. We seek winter light when we can. I find that both beautiful and slightly eerie. Beautiful because knowledge can soften old selection pressures. Eerie because it reminds us how recent and fragile our adaptations are. They are not permanent truths. They are compromises. And compromises can become liabilities when the world shifts. There is also a quiet tragedy under this calm story. For early northern populations, the cost of vitamin D shortage was real. Children could weaken. Women could die in childbirth if bones formed poorly. The selection pressure that spread lighter skin in some regions was built on these losses. Shrinking numbers in one line, growing numbers in another. I don't say that to frighten you. I say it because this is the dark history inside the gentle science. The tragedy is implied, not displayed. It is written in bone, but there is resilience too, and it is worth holding close. Humans did not only evolve, they invented. They found coastal foods. They traded. They changed diets. They created cultural solutions that changed biology's demands. So our species has always been doing two kinds of adaptation at once. Genetic adaptation, slow and unplanned. Cultural adaptation, fast and intentional. They dance together, and sometimes one leads. Now, as this part begins to quiet down, let your mind rest on a simple image. A hand. Your hand. The skin on it is a map, but not a border. A memory of light. A record of how your ancestors negotiated sun and shadow. How they balanced folate and vitamin D. How they survived dull seasons and fierce ones. And beneath that skin, the same architecture as everyone else. Blood. Bone. Breath. We are one family that learned to wear the sky in different ways. In the next part, we'll lean into the final gentle conclusion of this arc, how modern mixing and technology are reshaping the old relationship between skin and sun, and how you can look at any shade of skin and read it as survival, not separation. For now, stay close to the fire. Let the museum corridor fade. Let the candlelight soften, and let your breathing slow, like a river beneath ice, still moving, still alive. Before we move on, let me slow down on one small scene, because small scenes are where the mind relaxes best. Imagine an ancient shoreline in the far north. Not a postcard beach. A working coast. The air is sharp with salt and kelp. The rocks are slick, dark, and cold. A thin mist hangs low, and every sound is softened, as if the world has wrapped itself in wool. Footsteps on wet stone, the hush of waves pulling back, the faint clink of a shell against another shell. A band of people moves carefully along that shore, baskets and simple tools in their hands. Their skin is still relatively dark, at least by modern northern standards. Their bodies carry the memory of older suns, but they have learned something else now. They have learned to eat the sea. They pry mussels from rock with a piece of bone. They lift seaweed that smells like iron and rain. Someone holds a fish and lets a knife of flint slide beneath the skin. You can almost hear it, that soft scrape, and then the fish opens, bright and simple, and is placed near a small fire. Smoke curls. Oil drips and hisses. A child watches, eyes wide, and the child's breath makes a small cloud in the cold air. Without knowing the phrase vitamin D, without knowing chemistry, they are feeding their bodies a substance that can replace missing sunlight. They are carrying a lantern inside their food. They are doing cultural adaptation, not genetic adaptation, and it matters. This is one reason the story never fits into a neat equation. Sunlight matters. Diet matters. Culture matters. Now imagine, in contrast, an inland farming village far from the coast. The air smells of damp soil and hearth smoke. The ground is clay that sticks to the soles of the feet. You can feel it, that slow, heavy pull each time someone steps, as if the earth is reluctant to let anyone go. A woman walks from a hut to a storage pit, and each footstep leaves a shallow print that slowly fills with water. A child runs past and splashes it, laughing, then stops coughing, because smoke has been in the lungs all winter. Grain is everywhere. Grain in baskets. Grain in porridge. Grain ground into flour. Grain stored like a promise. It is food, yes, but it is narrow. No more constant fish. No more rich animal organs eaten often. The village depends on what it grows, and if the winter is long and the sky is gray, and the people stay inside to keep warm, then a quiet shortage begins, the kind you do not notice until it shows itself in bone. A child's legs bending, a mother's exhaustion, a brittle ache that makes a person feel older than their years. This is where selection can become cruelly efficient, without intention, without malice, just the cold logic of survival. And even that cruelty has a soft edge when you remember the truth our ancestors did not choose to suffer. They were trying to make life easier. Farming looks like security. A stored harvest looks like safety. It was only later that the hidden cost appeared. I've always found that detail painfully human. We build solutions, and the solution creates new problems. And then we build again. So when you think about skin color, it is not only an ancient story about sunlight, it is also a story about unintended consequences. And it is a story about how recent the changes really are. Ancient DNA has pulled up surprises, like shells lifted from deep water. Researchers have found genomes from people who lived thousands of years ago in Europe. And some of those people likely had combinations that break modern expectations: darker skin with light eyes. For example, the point is not novelty. The point is to loosen the grip of rigid boxes. Our past was more fluid than our categories. It is like looking at a river and realizing the river never had a single color. It carries silt from one bank, then another, and the water shifts. And the more you follow that river, the more you see that skin color is only one ripple on its surface. Let the fire crackle again, softly. Let the words become slower. Breathe in, a little cooler. Breathe out, a little warmer. Stay with the gentle pace. We still have time. The coals glow. The room holds steady. And if your thoughts try to wander into categories and arguments, you can let them pass like water past a stone. Tonight is for the deeper pattern. One species, many solutions. One long river of ancestry, carrying light in different ways. The room feels quieter now. Maybe it's just that your attention is settling, like dust that has been floating for hours, finally finding the floor. So let's take the next steps together, with the same gentle pace, and with the same promise: no rushing, no sharp corners. We have moved through Africa under intense sun, where dark skin was not a choice but an anchor. We followed migrations into dim latitudes, where that anchor became too heavy, and new solutions appeared. We watched small genetic dimmers spread faster than you might expect, because bones and births made the pressure relentless. We watched farming narrow diets and sharpen the problem even more. Now we arrive at the modern scramble. Because the world today moves faster than the slow tuning of evolution. The same body, built for one sky, can be carried to another sky in a single day. You know that feeling when you walk from bright sunlight into a dark room and your eyes need a moment to adjust? That moment is your body saying, "I was tuned for something else." Modern migration does that to our skin. A person whose ancestors lived in low UV climates may have skin that lets UV in quickly. That is useful in dim places where vitamin D is scarce. Move that skin under a fierce tropical sun, and the bargain changes. UV is no longer scarce. It is abundant, sometimes punishing. Without protection, sunburn becomes more likely, and over years, the risk of skin cancer rises. A person whose ancestors lived in high UV climates may have skin that blocks UV strongly. That is useful in intense sun where folate needs protection. Move that skin into a place with long winters and low sun angles, and the bargain changes the other way. UV becomes scarce. Vitamin D becomes harder to make. Without dietary sources or supplements, deficiency can creep in, especially in children and pregnant women. This is not theoretical. It is the old biology meeting a new map. And yet humans are not helpless in that meeting. We have learned to carry tools that act like adjustable settings. Sunscreen is one of those tools. A thin layer that takes the place of melanin when melanin is not enough for a new environment. Vitamin D supplementation is another. A small daily ritual that can replace missing sun. Clothing, shade, timing, fortified foods. The old selective pressures that once killed mothers and weakened children can be softened by a pharmacy shelf. When I say that, I feel two things at once. Relief, because suffering can be reduced. And awe, because cultural adaptation can now outrun genetic adaptation so completely. There is another quiet layer to this. Indoor life. For most of human history, we lived outside a lot, even in cold places, moving between camps, working near fires, hunting, gathering, carrying water. Skin saw the sun when it existed, even if it was weak. The modern world has roofs, screens, and work that keeps many people under artificial light for long stretches. So even a person whose ancestry matches their latitude can slip into deficiency if they spend most days indoors. The body does not care about passports. It cares about photons and food. Now, something else is happening that reshapes the old story even more. Mixing. People from different ancestral UV histories meet and have children. Those children carry genes from multiple climates at once. In many cities, a single street holds skin tones and hair types and eye colors that represent the whole planet. That is new. It means the old simple gradient is no longer the only pattern. The old map is overlaid with another one, and the overlay is complex. Siblings can vary. Cousins can vary. Families become mosaics. And what does that do to the relationship between skin and sunlight? It makes it less predictable. There is no single latitude that perfectly matches a mixed genome. There is no single ancestral environment to return to. There is only the modern environment and the modern toolkit. So the future of skin color evolution might not be a simple north versus south story anymore. It may become a story of balancing in an environment where people move, mix, and intervene. Selection on pigmentation could weaken in many places because technology and diet smooth the consequences, or it could shift in unexpected ways, shaped by behavior, by who spends time outdoors, who covers, who supplements, who doesn't. We can't be sure. And it is okay not to be sure. Deep time is patient. Now, I want to bring you back to the essence, because this is the kind of thought that can calm a mind that keeps trying to build boxes. Biologically, skin color is mostly about ultraviolet management. Dark skin is a high melanin strategy. It protects folate in intense sun. It shields DNA. Light skin is a low melanin strategy. It lets UV in, where UV is scarce. It supports vitamin D production and bone health. Intermediate tones are compromises shaped by moderate UV, seasonal UV, diet, and mixing. And the gene changes involved represent a tiny fraction of the whole genome. The darkest part of this story is not in the genes. It is in the myths we built around them. Humans have often taken surface traits and treated them as fate. We have used them to justify cruelty, to build walls, to decide who gets safety and who gets danger. That is a long history, and it is not gentle. But tonight, we are not feeding that history. Tonight, we are dissolving it. Because when you know the actual mechanics, the myths lose their grip. Skin color becomes what it always was, a practical adaptation, a tool. And once it is only a tool, it can no longer be a weapon in the mind. I want you to feel that release, like unclenching a fist you did not realize you were holding. Now let me leave you with one slow image, because the mind remembers images better than facts. Picture a world map drawn not with borders, but with sunlight. Near the equator, the page is bright. As you move north and south, it dims. Beneath the map are jars of pigment, like a painter's palette. Deep brown, warm brown, olive, golden, beige, pale. Beside them, a simple note. All of these shades are responses to light. And if you stand there long enough, you start to hear another sound under the museum. Hush. A river. Because ancestry is a river. It flows. It mixes. It changes direction. It carries silt from many places. It does not respect the lines people draw. So when you see a face, you are seeing river history on the skin. Now, take a slow breath. Let your breath become the metronome of this story. In, quiet. Out, quieter. There is no exam. No need to remember gene names. No need to hold on to dates. Just hold on to one gentle line. Your skin color is a memory of sunlight. That's all. It is not a verdict. It is not a prophecy. It is a record of where your ancestors stood under the sky, what they ate, what pressures shaped them, what small changes helped them survive. Now, let the details blur. Let the map soften. The candles are still burning. The fire is still breathing. Your jaw can loosen. Your shoulders can drop. And as your breathing slows, imagine the oldest scene again, not as a lesson, but as a quiet picture. A group of dark-skinned humans under an African sky. Long ago, the sun is fierce by day. The night is wide. They sit close to a small fire. They tell stories. They watch children fall asleep. They do not know that their descendants will one day live under snow, under fog, under neon lights. They only know the warmth of the flame and the closeness of each other. That closeness is still with you. It is in your cells. So stay safe here, in this room, in this soft moment. We can leave the rest to tomorrow. The story can keep going without you for a while. Like a river under ice, still moving, still alive. And because we still have time, let me linger on one slow, practical scene. The kind that makes science feel like a story instead of a lecture. Imagine a city winter. A person steps out of a building. The air bites, but gently, like a warning rather than a threat. The sky is pale gray, and the sun, if it appears at all, looks like a thin coin behind cloud. They pull their collar up. They hurry across a street. Their footsteps echo between buildings. The whole world feels like it is made of stone and glass and breath. This person could have any ancestry. Their skin could be very light, very dark, or somewhere between. But the city treats everyone similarly. It pulls people indoors, work indoors, commute indoors, eat indoors, sleep indoors. Days pass with very little direct sun touching skin. In that setting, vitamin D becomes less about ancestry and more about routine, about whether food contains enough, about whether someone remembers supplements, about whether there is a moment on a balcony or in a park when the skin sees the sky. It is strange, isn't it, that modern life can recreate an ancient problem without needing Ice Age conditions at all. A roof can make a winter. And on the other side, imagine a bright coastal summer. The sun is fierce. The air tastes like salt. Light reflects from water and sand, and the skin is asked to absorb more photons than it knows what to do with. Here, the problem flips. Vitamin D is easy. Protection is the issue. So people do what our ancestors could not do. They choose shade. They choose hats. They choose long sleeves that feel like a soft armor. They rub sunscreen onto shoulders and the backs of hands. And the smell is faintly chemical. A modern scent that still means safety. They teach children to do the same, like teaching a spell, except the spell is just behavior. This is what I mean when I say we have become caretakers of our own ancient compromises. Now, the mixing continues beneath all of this. In a city, you can watch it in small moments. A couple holding hands in a train station. A family in a park. A child with curls and eyes that catch light in an unusual way. The genes in that child are a conversation between different skies, different latitudes, different diets, different histories. And the conversation does not need to resolve into a single answer. It can remain a blend. This is another point that feels calming when you let it. The human future does not need to look like one correct form. There is no final design. There is only adaptation, and adaptation can be plural. Some people worry about what is natural, but nature has always been mixing, always recombining, always trying new combinations. We are not breaking the story. We are continuing it. Now, take a slow breath again. In. Gentle. Out. Gentler. Let the words drift like dust in candlelight. And remember the simplest truth. Most of what makes you you is not on the surface. The surface is a small set of adjustments. Underneath is the shared machinery of being human. The shared nervous system that calms when the room feels safe. The shared heart rhythm that slows when breathing slows. That is the part of the story you can trust. One more image. Then, before we let this part close, picture yourself holding a small candle in a dark room. The candlelight falls on your fingers. Whatever shade your skin is, the light makes it look alive, warm, slightly translucent at the edges. It reminds you that skin is not a flag. It is living tissue, full of blood and nerve endings, always working, always repairing. Now imagine that same candle held by someone else. The light falls on their fingers too. Different pigment, same glow, the same thin transparency near the nail, the same tiny lines and creases, the same warmth. That is a small truth that can disarm a big myth. And when myths fade, sleep comes easier. So let the fire keep breathing. Let the museum map and the city map and the ancient map all blur together until they are just one soft picture of Earth, turning slowly, carrying humans across it like seeds on wind. Your eyes can grow heavy now. Your tongue can rest in your mouth. Your forehead can smooth. You do not have to solve anything tonight. You only have to be here, breathing, safe, while deep time continues its quiet work. If you wake later, even for a moment, and a thought about difference tries to tighten your chest, you can answer it with this softer thought. Difference is not a wall. It is a footprint. A footprint left by sun angles, by cloud cover, by coastlines and diets, by the slow choices of where a group could survive. A footprint is evidence that someone passed through and kept going, and you are part of that passing through. Now let the footprint fade into the dark, and let yourself drift. The night outside is wide, and it does not demand explanations. It only offers silence and the soft continuation of breath. Stay with that. Just breath and rest. A little more stillness. A little less thinking. The fire, the candle, the river, the old sun, all of it can wait. You can sleep. The fire is lower now. Not gone, just quieter, as if it has learned the same lesson our bodies learned under shifting skies. Conserve what matters. Release what does not. If you listen closely, you can hear the smallest sounds returning. A faint pop, the soft settling of ash. Somewhere beyond the room, maybe a distant motor, or a dog turning in its sleep. The world is still here, even when you stop chasing it with your thoughts. So let's move into the last stretch of this journey, where the science becomes something like a lullaby, and the darker undertone becomes clear. without ever needing to shout. Because the darkest part of this story is not pigment. It is what humans did with pigment. And I know those words can feel heavy. So we will hold them gently, like a fragile cup. No spilling, no sudden movement. You can picture that museum again, if it helps. The long corridor, the polished floor, the velvet hush, glass cases, bones and beads, a faint scent of dust and old paper. Somewhere, a small placard with tidy dates. Somewhere, a guard shifting weight, the soft squeak of shoes. In those cases, the story is always larger than the labels. Skin is one of the easiest things to see. It sits right on the surface, bright under sun, muted under candlelight. And because it is easy to see, it became easy to talk about, easy to point at, easy to turn into a symbol. But biology never meant it as a symbol. Biology meant it as a tool for managing ultraviolet radiation, a tool for balancing folate protection and vitamin D production, a tool for surviving the sky. When we forget that, the mind starts building castles out of sand. Big ideas made from tiny differences. Hierarchies built from surface traits. Stories that pretend a weather adaptation is a measure of worth. Honestly, I've always found it strange how hungry humans are for certainty, how quickly we reach for categories, as if naming something makes it safe, as if a label can protect us from the unknown. Yet the genome does not behave like our labels. It behaves like a river. It flows. It branches. It mixes. It leaves deposits of ancient encounters. It carries memories from different places. It does not stop neatly at borders. It does not draw lines and obey them. If you walk from one village to the next, across a continent, the change in traits is often gradual, a little lighter, a little darker, a different hair texture, a slightly different face shape, a shift in diet, a shift in language, a shift in the local sky, gradients, not walls. And when geneticists look deeply, they see something even calmer. Most human genetic diversity exists within populations, not neatly between them. People who share a label can be very different from each other. People who carry different labels can be closely related. Skin color can change quickly with a few genes under strong selection, while most of the genome remains shared. The truth is almost boring in its simplicity. We are one species, one family that kept moving. Now, let's let that truth do its soothing work. Imagine the old world again, but softly. A group of hunter-gatherers in a northern forest, long ago. The air is damp. The ground is dark with leaf rot. Their footsteps are quiet, careful. They breathe in cold air and breathe out pale mist. Above them, the sun is low, and when it slips behind clouds, the forest becomes a kind of dusk, even at midday. They are not thinking about vitamin D. They are thinking about food and warmth and the safety of their children. They are thinking about the next river crossing. There it is, the river. Black water under gray sky. The surface moves slowly, almost silently, as if the river is trying not to wake anything. A stick floats by, a leaf, a thin ribbon of foam. The river breathes. They cross it anyway. They step onto wet stones. Their feet slip. Someone catches a shoulder. A child is lifted, held close. Their clothing smells like smoke in animal hide, like damp wool, like the sharp scent of cold. And each crossing, each winter, each birth, is part of the invisible selection that shapes bodies over time. Sometimes the shaping is gentle. Sometimes it is cruel. A shortage that bends bone. A pregnancy that fails when folate is lost under too much sun. A pelvis that did not form properly in a dim climate. The shrinking numbers of one family line, the growing numbers of another. And then, in the modern world, we do something startling. We interrupt the cruelty. We bring food from far away. We bring supplements. We bring medicine and surgery. We bring sunscreen. We bring knowledge. We bring light. We do not erase the past, but we soften its sharpest edges. That is one of the most hopeful parts of being human. And still, the old biology remains inside us, like old carvings on stone beneath fresh paint. So when we move across latitudes today, we sometimes feel the mismatch, the ache of deficiency, the sting of sunburn, the quiet warning of too much or too little light. And we answer with care, not with shame. We answer with a hat, with a tablet, with a walk outside at noon, face turned up to a weak winter sun, eyes half closed, with shade at the beach, with a doctor's calm voice, with a parent's gentle reminder. This is what it means to live in a world where ancestry and geography no longer always match. The old rule book is still in our bodies, but we have learned to read it and to write notes in the margins. Now, because this is a sleep story, let me slow time again. Picture a kitchen at night, a small light over the sink, everything else dim, a cup in your hands, warm water running, a soft hiss, steam rising, the smell of soap, the gentle circular motion of cleaning. Rinse, clean, rinse. This is not very different from what humans have always done. In essence, repetition, ritual, car. Somewhere in that repetition is the truth of our species. We survive by doing small things again and again. Drink, eat, cover, rest, teach, hold. And when you're tired, you let yourself be held by the room, by candlelight, by the hush of a museum corridor that exists only in imagination, by the sound of a river, steady, indifferent, kind. Now, I want to offer you one final thought for this part, something you can keep if you like, and let go if you don't. When you look at a person, what you see first is the surface, but the surface is only the cover art. The book beneath is the same book we all carry: the human nervous system, the human need for warmth, for safety, for belonging, for stories. Skin color is a chapter title written by sunlight and diet and deep time. It is not the whole book, So let your mind stop sorting. Let it stop stacking people into shelves. Tonight, you can let the shelves collapse into dust. Harmless, quiet dust that settles on the floor and becomes part of the earth again. Your breath can slow. Your shoulders can sink. Your jaw can unclench. If thoughts come, they can pass through like water, through reeds. In and out. In and out. The fire is still here. The river is still moving. Deep time is still turning the world gently under the stars. And in the next part, we will let the story close the way a good night should close, not with a lesson to remember, but with a softness that lets you drift, with the sense that you belong to something vast, and that vastness is not frightening at all. Just quiet, just wide, just waiting for you to rest a little more. If you were standing here with me, right beside the fireplace, I might point to the shadows on the wall and tell you they are doing what our ancestors did, adjusting, adapting, never staying exactly the same shape for long. A shadow is honest in that way. It does not claim it is the body. It only admits it is the body meeting light. Skin is like that, too. A meeting place. A conversation between cells and sky. When humans began crossing oceans in the last few centuries, that conversation became complicated, like a letter sent to the wrong address, arriving anyway, still needing to be read. A family from a bright latitude arriving in a dim one. A family from a dim latitude arriving in a bright one. A mixing of sunlight histories in the same streets, the same schools, the same quiet apartment buildings with laundry hanging like flags of ordinary life. In a place like that, the old evolutionary compromise becomes visible in a new way. Pale skin under intense sun becomes tender quickly. Freckles bloom like small constellations. The skin remembers it was built to let light in. Dark skin under weak sun can feel like a strong coat in a room that has grown cold. The coat is protective, but now you need warmth, and the warmth is scarce. There is no shame in either. There is only the simple fact of bodies doing their best with what they were given. I've always found it comforting that the solutions we use now are so humble. A bottle of sunscreen. You squeeze a line into your palm, rub it between your hands until it warms, then smooth it over skin with slow, careful strokes. A ritual of protection. A small vitamin tablet. Chalky. Plain. You swallow it with a sip of water. A ritual of replacement. In the museum, there might be a display of old tools. A scraping blade. A needle made from bone. Those objects seem simple until you imagine the hands that made them. The patience, the repetition, the tiny motions done in a cold shelter while the wind pressed against the entrance like a curious animal. That is human history. Small motions against large forces. So when someone claims that the surface of a body reveals destiny, it is almost laughable, if it were not also tragic. Because destiny, in this story, is the angle of the sun, the curve of the winter horizon, the distance between a farm and a coastline, a dietary shift from fish to grain, a mutation, a single letter in DNA, drifting through generations like a whisper traveling down a hallway. That is what made light skin common in some places. That is what kept dark skin strong in others. No moral meaning, no ranking, just survival. Now let's slow down with one more scene. Picture an early farming village somewhere in the north. It is morning. The sky is thin and gray. Smoke rises from a few roofs. There is mud everywhere, clay clinging to ankles, to hems, to the edges of wooden tools. People move with slow familiarity, like they have done this so many times their bodies know without thinking. A woman steps out into the cold light. She pauses. She rubs her hands together. She looks at her child, still small, still wrapped tightly. The child's bones are still forming. The village does not know the word vitamin, but the village knows weakness and strength. Across the path, another family has children who run more easily. The difference is not visible in any heroic way. It is a few degrees of health, a few fewer infections, a slightly easier birth. Natural selection is made of these small differences. Selection is not dramatic. It is a count, a ledger, a list of who lived long enough to have children, a list of who did not. Shrinking numbers, growing numbers, deep time keeping its quiet books. Then, later, much later, a city. Streetlights in rain. Reflections on pavement. The smell of wet concrete and hot food from a stall. People of every shade passing each other on the sidewalk. Coats brushing. Umbrellas tapping. Footsteps overlapping like a soft drum. In that city, ancestry is mixed and braided. Children are born with skin that carries multiple sunlight histories at once. A mosaic. There is something beautiful about that, like different rivers meeting and becoming one wider river. The candlelight flickers. Dust floats in it like slow snow. The river of ancestry keeps moving, but you do not have to follow it tonight. You can let it carry itself. You can let yourself drift toward the ending, the calm closing of this long thought, as if the mind is setting a book down on a table, gently, without a thud. And somewhere, far from here, the sun is rising or setting, painting 1,000 different skins with the same light. If a stray worry tries to sneak in, you can treat it like a museum visitor who has wandered too close to the glass. You don't have to scold it. Just guide it along with a soft hand. Look, we are not meant to live inside labels. Labels are useful for filing papers, not for understanding people. People are moving water. People are warm breath in cold air. People are candlelight on skin, changing color as the flame shifts. So tonight, when the mind wants to categorize, you can simply return to sensation. The weight of your blanket, the slow rise of your chest, the tiny pause at the top of the inhale, like a comma. Then the exhale, longer, like a line of river water sliding past stone. You can let the story keep folding itself away, page by page, until only the quiet remains. The room feels softer now, doesn't it? Not because anything outside has changed, but because your body is beginning to accept that it is safe to stop holding so tightly. The fire has made a small hollow in the logs, a pocket of glowing red, like a quiet eye half open. The candle has grown shorter. Wax pooled and cooled, then warmed again near the flame. Dust hangs in the light in slow spirals, as if time itself is drifting down. I want to bring you back to the beginning for a moment. Not to restart, just to close the circle. Look at your hand. The way the skin catches light, the way it becomes warmer or cooler in color, depending on the bulb. The moon, the screen, the candle. It is easy to forget how alive skin is. It is not paint. It is a living boundary that sweats, heals, remembers. Your skin is a conversation with the sky. Long ago, that conversation began under the fierce African sun. We were all dark then, every one of us. Not as an identity, just as a solution. Melanin as a shield. Folate guarded like a treasure. DNA protected so pregnancies could succeed and children could grow. Then, slowly, some people walked away from that sun. Not because they were chasing a new color, because they were chasing food, water, space, possibility, curiosity, survival, the pull of what was over the next ridge. They carried dark skin into new latitudes where the sun became shy. And in that shyness, the old protection turned into a new problem. Vitamin D became scarce, like firewood in a wet winter. Bones softened. Some children grew fragile. Some mothers faced births their bodies could not complete. The darkness of the story is in that quiet cruelty, the way nature selects without caring who is kind, who is brave, who is loved. Nature only counts. Who lived? Who did not? That is the ledger of deep time, and it is written in shrinking numbers. Then, in a few people, a tiny change, a molecular typo. A single letter switched in the vast library of DNA. A small dial turned down on melanin, not to make beauty, to let more light through. And in the north, that small dial mattered. A slightly easier pregnancy, a slightly stronger skeleton, a child who survived one more winter cough. A family line that grew instead of fading over generations. The dial turned again and again through different genes, in different regions, in different populations. Europeans, East Asians, others, arriving at lighter skin through different paths because the pressure was similar but the genetic tools were not identical. Convergent evolution. Different rivers finding their way to the same sea. And then farming arrived, quiet at first, then everywhere. Grain in the bowl, bread in the hand, less fish, less animal fat, less dietary vitamin D, a new crisis layered onto the old, pushing selection harder, faster. Light skin variants swept through populations with startling speed because the cost of deficiency was too high. This is how a recent adaptation became common. This is how, in the long time scale of humans, pale skin is almost new. Newer than cities. Newer than pottery. Newer than so many of the things we treat as ancient. Now, breathe. You don't have to hold the dates. You don't have to memorize the gene names. Sul 24 SL 45 Oka doi Edar. They can drift away like labels on museum cases. You can keep only the feeling. that the surface is a record of environment, and the person beneath is the same species, carrying the same deep design. Sometimes, when I'm out walking at night, I like to look at streetlights after rain. It's a small habit, nothing grand. The light pools on the ground, and the wet pavement turns it into a ribbon, like a little river of gold. People pass through that light without thinking. Their coats catch it. Their faces brighten for a second, then fade back into shadow. In those moments, it feels obvious that the light does not belong to any one person. It belongs to the street, to the night, to everyone. Sunlight is like that too, just older, stronger, and more indifferent. It falls on all of us, and our bodies respond according to the history written into them. Now, let's do one last slow scene together. Something you can sink into. Imagine a winter morning in the north. Long ago, the sky is pearl gray. The sun is a pale coin, low and distant. The air is so cold it has a taste, like clean metal. A small group wakes inside a shelter. They shift under furs. Someone blows on embers until they glow. A child sits up, rubbing sleep from eyes. Their hair is dark, or maybe lighter. It doesn't matter yet. They are small. They are alive. Outside, snow has crusted on the ground. Footsteps crunch softly. The world is quiet in that way winter can be, like a museum hall before opening. They walk to a river. The river is half frozen, breathing through gaps in the ice. Water moves beneath like a secret. A reed trembles, brittle. The surface makes a thin sound, a tiny crack, then stillness. The river breathes. The people kneel and drink. Cold water touches lips. They taste minerals, earth. Their hands redden in the air. Someone wraps cloth around a wrist. Someone lifts the child back up, tucking them close. Tiny actions. That is how history happens. Not in speeches, in hands, in breath, in people choosing, again and again, to keep going. Now shift the scene. A bright coastline, far south. The sun is loud there, even when you try not to notice. It flashes off water. It burns down on sand. It turns the air into shimmer. A different group moves under that sun, with dark skin that protects folate, protects DNA, allows pregnancy to succeed under fierce UV. They know the shade of acacia trees. They know the feeling of heat on shoulders. They know the way sweat cools. They are also human. Their children are also small. Their worries are also ordinary. The same species, two climates, two sets of pressures, two different answers written in pigment. And now, after all this time, those answers stand side by side in modern cities, in elevators, on buses, in schools, in hospital waiting rooms, in grocery aisles with fluorescent light and quiet music, a palette of human solutions, all under one roof. If you let that thought settle, it can be deeply calming, because it means the categories we cling to are shallow. It means the stories that try to turn pigment into destiny are made up, like ghosts in old houses. The real story is simpler. You are looking at adaptation. You are looking at survival. You are looking at a family that refused to disappear. And yes, there is darkness in that. The darkness of rickets in a village. The darkness of a woman dying in childbirth because the sun was too weak where she lived. The darkness of children lost to infections when bones and immune systems were undernourished. The darkness of humans inventing cruel meanings for harmless traits. But we have been doing something else too. We have been learning. We have been inventing ways to protect each other from the old trade-offs. We have been making it possible for people to live far from the skies their ancestors evolved under. We hack the old rules with gentle tools. Sunscreen, supplements, fortified food, medical care, education, a hat offered to a friend, a reminder spoken softly, a hand on a shoulder. That is also human evolution in a broader sense, not genetic, but cultural, the way knowledge spreads faster than DNA ever could. Some scholars argue that culture has become our primary adaptive engine now. It's debated how far that goes, and how it will shape the future, but you can feel the truth of it in small moments. A child in a northern city receives vitamin D drops. A light-skinned person in a tropical place learns to cover up at noon. Simple adjustments that keep bodies safe. So the story of skin color is not just a story of genes. It is a story of care. A story of paying attention. A story of noticing what hurts and trying to soften it. Now, the fire is nearly down to coals. If you were here, you would hear the soft hiss as a log settles. A faint sigh of heat. The smell of smoke, sweet and dry. Candlelight still flickers, making everything look a little older than it is, like we are all living inside an ancient photograph. Let your eyes rest. Let your thoughts be less sharp. If a final question rises, what does it all mean? You can answer it gently, without trying too hard. It means this: your skin is a weather record. Your body is an archive of sunlight. Your presence is proof that a long chain of ancestors survived hunger, cold, heat, disease, and loss, and still found a way to protect one more child. And beneath the surface, you share almost everything with every other human you will ever meet. You don't have to solve the world tonight. You don't have to carry history in your jaw, in your shoulders, in your stomach. You can let it down. Just like dust settling after footsteps fade in a museum hall. Just like clay sinking back to the riverbed when the current slows. Just like the last line of a story, arriving not as a command, but as a soft closing of the door. Your breathing can keep going. In and out. In and out. The river breathes somewhere, with or without you listening. Deep time turns the planet gently, with or without you watching. And you can rest. Before we finish, let me linger in one more place. A laboratory, bright and quiet. The modern kind of hush. You know that feeling when a room is so clean it almost feels like a chapel. White walls, stainless steel, Gloves snapped gently onto hands. A refrigerator humming. A tiny tube of powder that was once bone. Once a person who walked under a different sky. Scientists lean close, not out of cold curiosity, but with a kind of reverence. They are trying to read a message that survived thousands of years. A message written in cells, copied again and again, then finally laid down in earth. A fragment of ancient DNA. Dust, yes, but meaningful dust. They run the sequences. They compare letters. They watch patterns appear on screens like constellations. And sometimes the result surprises them, not because nature is trying to be dramatic, but because humans love simple boxes and nature refuses them. A hunter-gatherer in Ice Age Europe with dark skin and light eyes. A farming population arriving with one set of variants, then shifting rapidly in only a few thousand years. A northern group that stays relatively darker because their diet, rich in fish and marine fat, carries vitamin D through long winters. The sky is dim, but the food is bright with what the body needs. And in that lab, the old story becomes clearer. Skin color is not a single switch. It is a set of dimmers, tuned differently in different places. So when you hear someone speak as if there are only a few types of humans, you can remember the lab, the tubes, the careful hands, the data whispering. No, it is more complex and more gentle than that. Now let's return to the land again. Picture a coastline where people have always eaten from the sea. Salt wind, kelp, cold spray. A seal haul out on rocks. Smoke rising from a fire where fish skin crackles. Oil glistens in a bowl. The taste is strong, nourishing. In that world, vitamin D is not a rare treasure. It is part of daily life. The body does not need to open the blinds of the skin quite as wide. Pigment can remain, and still the bones can grow strong. Then picture an inland farm. Fields of grain. A gray horizon. A pot of porridge. Bread. Again and again. The same food because it is reliable, because it fills the belly, because it keeps the village alive in one way, while quietly starving it in another. That is the strange trade of agriculture. It gives stability and takes diversity. It allows cities and creates deficiencies. So selection pushes harder. A little less pigment means a little more vitamin D from a weak sun. And that can be the difference between a pelvis that can birth a child and a pelvis that cannot. It is not romantic. It is just math. Now, bring your attention back to your own body. Maybe you can feel where your skin is warmest. The hands, the face, the places where blood runs near the surface. Maybe you can feel the slight coolness of a foot outside the blanket. Maybe you can feel a pulse somewhere, a tiny drum, steady. All of that is happening because your ancestors kept going. Thousands of nights, like this one. Some under stars. Some under low winter moons. Some under the heavy heat of equatorial darkness, where insects sing and the air smells like wet earth. They slept. They woke. They walked. Footsteps in sand. footsteps in snow, footsteps on stone. And then one day, you don't owe anyone a category. You don't owe the world a simplified story about what you are. You can be complex, like the genome. You can be mixed, like rivers. You can be calm, like a candle that does not argue with the darkness. It simply glows inside it. Good night.